Hello. Now, with the release of the Caddx Ascent Pro VRX, we now have three different ways in which we can tap in to the Ascent system. The obvious question is, why is there three things and which one is the best? Spoiler alert, I'm not going to tell you which one is the best because I don't think there is one thing that is the best. But I'm going to try and explain what I think is going to be the difference between the three units and why you might choose the goggles over, say, the Pro or the Pro over the standard VRX. Okay, so let's start with where Caddx introduced us to the Ascent system, the Ascent Goggles. They're $149. They're capable of 720, 60 and 1080, 60. And what that means is you get a kind of a latency of around 55 milliseconds when it's on 720, 60 and around 60 milliseconds of latency when it's on 1080, 60. So no high frame rate, no super low latency with these, but for $149 you get an all-in-one package, but also includes head tracking. So if you're into using gimbals, that kind of thing, you'll be able to use these for head tracking. So why would you pick these? Well, for me, I see this as kind of the beginner entry, the basic setup for Ascent system. It's not going to be all singing, all dancing, but it'll get you started and get you into the system. Yes, it doesn't have the lowest possible latency, but 55 milliseconds, I find when I'm flying around, is more than enough for enjoying the hobby. I'm not going to be, breaking any speed records around a racetrack or anything with these, but they do the job. They introduce you to the system. They're $149. If you're brand new to the FPV, you can get flying with these. So that's where I see these, kind of that basic entry, not all singing, all dancing, but they kind of get the job done. The other thing with these, so there's obviously no antennas visible on the outside. There's two patches in there and they're around 5.5, 6 dBm. I've tested these with the Light Plus VTX set to 500 milliwatts, and my plane fail-safed at just over 10.5 kilometers. Some of the other testers have had the Light Plus out to around 16 kilometers using these goggles. So the goggles in there are directional antenna. So if you're facing forward, your range at the back is going to be restricted in comparison to the front. So if you're standing in the middle of an area flying completely around you, you're going to need to turn to get the same distance in every direction. But if you're basically standing at the side of a football pitch or something like that, flying out in front of you, they'll be perfectly fine. And yeah, on a plane with 500 milliwatts, you're going to have around 15, 16 kilometer range with the 500 milliwatt VTX and around 4, 5, 6 kilometer range with the 100 milliwatt VTX. So yeah, an all-in-one kind of package, jack of all trades, master of none kind of thing. The one thing that this has that the VRXs don't is head tracking. So the next thing that was released was the Ascent VRX. Now this came from kind of the industry side of Caddx and made its way into the consumer side of Caddx. So that means inside this, if you have the right VTX to pair with it, this can do 4 watts of power when it's kind of unlocked. Obviously in the consumer side of things at the minute, all we have is the 100 milliwatt Lite and the 500 milliwatt Lite Plus. So you can't kind of tap into that higher power, but it does have that capability. It also has the capability of wider frequency range. Again, that kind of comes from the industry side of things. So who is this for? Why would you buy this? Well, obviously, if you're new to the hobby, you don't have goggles or anything like that, you're probably going to end up buying the goggles or buying a set of analog goggles and pairing this up with it. And that's kind of what it's for. It's for somebody who already has a set of FPV goggles with a HDMI in. You then take a feed from this into your goggles. So with this, it can do 720, 60, 720, 100, 720, 120, 1080, 60. So if you're wanting lower range, you'll use this, and you'll use it with the 720, 100 or 720, 120 setting if your screen or your goggles are compatible with that. I haven't been able to test 720, 120, but the 720, 100 for me gives the lowest latency of the system, and it's around 34 to 40 millisecond range. On average, it's around 38 milliseconds or thereabouts, and that's the lowest that the system can do. When I use a VRX on the same screen resolutions and frame rate settings as the goggles, so 720, 60 or 720, 1080, 60, the latency on this is lower than what's on the goggles. I'm seeing around 40 milliseconds of latency using a VRX set to 720, 60. So there's something going on with the goggles that means there's an extra kind of frame in there, an extra 15 milliseconds of latency compared to the VRX. So if you are wanting a system that's got the lowest latency, you're going to want a VRX rather than the goggles. So that's what this is for. This is for somebody who kind of wants a bit of a modular setup, who already has a set of goggles. You can set this on a tripod, HDMI it into your goggles, or HDMI it into a screen. You've now got removable antennas, so you can set this up on a ground station for those guys that want to fly long range with wings. So that's the main difference then between this and the goggles. And this is the unit that I think that most people are probably going to get the most benefit out of. It's $99, so it's $50 less than the goggles, and it's $50 less than the Pro unit. Most people who already own goggles, unless it's something like the Caddx Goggles X, may not be able to utilize a higher frame rate and screen resolution. So this being able to output 720, 100 is probably going to suit most people. So it's the cheapest unit out of the lot, and it's probably the most versatile out of the lot. And obviously with it being a VRX, it doesn't have head tracking or anything like that. And so then we move on to the newest, the VRX Pro. Now, what is the difference between it and the original standard VRX? Well, there's 2 or 3 subtle things that make this different from that. First thing is the obvious thing, is these different Pro antennas. Basically, they're just an antenna that has a wider frequency band. So while both of the VRX can do more frequencies than our standard 5.8, kind of down to 3 and up to 6 or 7, with the standard VRX, if you wanted to utilize that, you need to go and buy antennas that have that wide band. This comes with antennas that can tap into that full sweep of frequencies. So that's the first difference, if that's something that you're into. The second difference, and probably the main difference for most people, is that this can do 1080, 100 and 1080, 120 frames per second. So you're getting a higher resolution and a higher frame rate, therefore a lower latency. Now, 1080, 100 still has a higher latency than 720, 100. So if you're after the absolute lowest latency possible in the system, 720, 100 or 720, 120 is where you're going to want to be. And the normal VRX can also do that. But if you're wanting that little bit of extra screen resolution and still keep the latency under control, then this is going to be able to do it. And I find that there's probably 4 or 5 milliseconds of difference between 1080, 100 and 720, 100. So for some people, that will make a massive difference. And the other thing this can do that the other units can't is USB video connection. So what that means is you can plug a USB cable from the USB port into your phone or a tablet via an on-the-go cable, load up an app like VLC or USB camera, and you can then share the feed that's coming off the VRX onto that secondary screen. So that's handy because Ascent doesn't have a share mode, and if you want somebody to be able to ride along with you, that's the only way you're going to be able to do that, is that UVC feature from the USB into your phone. The one other thing that this has an advantage over these other units is the DVR. If you're flying at 1080-100 with this unit, when you play back the DVR footage on your computer, you'll see that it's been recorded at 100 frames per second. If you're flying at 720-100, you'll see the same. These other units, however, they downsample the frame rate. So if you're flying at 720-100 with the standard VRX, you'll see that the DVR is probably something like recorded at 50 frames per second. It's kind of downsampled and lost every other frame, where this records the whole lot. One or two other little things in there. You're able to just literally record the full screen rather than just recording the feed and then having an OSD and an SRT file that you have to combine later on. With this, what you see on your screen is what's recorded. So that's kind of handy if you're, time limited and you don't want to have to start reconstructing OSD and SRT files and things like that. You can just screen grab the whole lot. So that's kind of the advantage. So the advantage of this over the standard VRX, antennas that have control the full sweep, video out via the USB, and 1080, 100 and 1080, 120 frame rates and resolutions. One thing that must be said about all of these systems, Caddx has now introduced audio with the Ascent system, with the Lite Plus, and with the RC VTX, which is also known as the UHD from Ironquad. All of these will be able to record the audio. You can't stream the audio directly from this to headphones, but the DVR will be able to record the audio with these. So that's a handy little thing. So who are all these things for then? So I see that as a beginner or somebody who is new to the hobby, doesn't have goggles, or is driving cars and wants to use gimbals and things like that with Ascent. This is where you're going to want to be. There's a penalty of slightly higher latency compared to using these with a screen, but you get an all-in-one package, plug it in, and kind of away you go. So I see this as kind of the basic or the entry or the beginner kind of option, with the advantage of having head tracking. I see this as kind of the main user. Most people are probably going to be happy enough with 720-100 to get the lowest latency. You probably already own goggles that are only 720-100 capable anyway. You're happy enough to take the stock antenna off and buy additional antenna and modify this. So I see this as kind of the workhorse of Ascent. Most people will probably utilize this and find that the functions of this meet their kind of their expectations and their needs. And I see this as kind of the power user. Those that are happy to spend a little bit more and get a little bit more, they'll probably change out the antennas anyway, but things like being able to share out the USB, or you do want to have extra screen resolution and frame rates for the extra $50, you'll probably be happy enough to buy this. So I don't see a best in these. I just see different things that may suit different users. Options are always good, and Caddx, with having these three things, have given users options for something that's suited to them. So I hope that clears up a little bit of what these are and who I think they're for. Until the next one.